The orphanage sat on a hill overlooking Lisbon's poorest neighborhood, a crumbling building from the 1940s that had housed 3 generations of abandoned children, but was now facing closure due to government budget cuts and the kind of bureaucratic indifference that treats vulnerable children as line items to be eliminated rather than human beings who deserve protection and care. And when Ronaldo first drove past the Lar dos Anjos on his way to visit his mother, he noticed the faded sign and broken windows that suggested an institution barely surviving on hope and determination rather than adequate funding or public support. The director, Sister Maria Fernanda, had been fighting for 18 months to keep the orphanage open, writing letters to government officials who never responded, organizing fundraising events that raised barely enough to cover basic utilities, and watching helplessly as the 43 children in her care faced the prospect of being scattered across overcrowded state facilities where individual attention and family-like relationships would be impossible to maintain, where children who had already lost their biological families would lose the only stable home they had ever known, simply because society had decided their care was too expensive to prioritize. It was Isabella, a 7-year-old girl with curious eyes and a missing front tooth, who first approached Ronaldo's car when he stopped to ask directions after getting lost on his way to his mother's house. And when she recognized him through the driver's window, her excitement was not about meeting a famous footballer, but about the possibility that someone important might notice their orphanage and perhaps understand that the children inside deserved better than the uncertainty that had been hanging over their lives like a storm cloud that refused to break or dissipate. "Mr. Cristiano," she said with the directness that only children possess, pressing her face against his car window with hands that bore the calluses of someone who helped with household chores beyond her years. "Do you want to see our house? Sister Maria says we might have to leave soon, but maybe if you see how nice it is inside, you could tell someone important that we should stay, because this is where we live, and we don't want to go to different places where we won't be together anymore." And something in her innocent assumption that he might have the power to help, combined with her obvious love for the place she called home, made Ronaldo turn off his car engine and follow her through the orphanage's front door, into a world that would fundamentally change his understanding of what family meant and what responsibilities came with having resources that could solve problems that seemed insurmountable to everyone else involved. The building's interior revealed the kind of loving care that transforms inadequate facilities into genuine homes through the dedication of people who refuse to let circumstances diminish their commitment to the children in their charge. Walls decorated with artwork created by small hands, dormitories where beds were arranged to create family groupings rather than institutional rows, and a kitchen where older children helped prepare meals while younger ones did homework at tables that had been repaired so many times they looked like patchwork quilts made of wood and determination rather than fabric and thread. Sister Maria Fernanda, a woman in her 60s, who had devoted her entire adult life to caring for children who had nowhere else to go, greeted Ronaldo with the cautious politeness of someone who had learned to be grateful for any attention, while remaining realistic about the likelihood that visitors would translate their momentary sympathy into the kind of sustained support that could actually solve systemic problems. But when he asked specific questions about the orphanage's financial situation and the government's decision to close the facility, she began to understand that this was not a casual visit or a photo opportunity, but a genuine inquiry from someone who might actually have the power and inclination to help. The tour that followed introduced Ronaldo to 43 children ranging in age from 3 to 17, each with their own story of abandonment or tragedy that had led them to this place. But what struck him most was not their individual sadness, but their collective resilience. The way they had formed family bonds that transcended blood relationships. The way older children automatically cared for younger ones. The way they had created traditions and relationships that provided stability and love, despite the institutional setting that could never fully replace the families they had lost or never had. 10-year-old Miguel showed Ronaldo the small garden where the children grew vegetables for their meals, explaining with pride how they had learned to make the most of their limited space and resources, while 14-year-old Ana demonstrated the computer skills she had taught herself using an ancient machine donated by a local business, her dream of becoming a programmer seemingly impossible given their circumstances, but undimmed by the practical obstacles that stood between her current situation and her future aspirations. The financial details that Sister Maria shared during their private conversation revealed the scope of the crisis facing not just this orphanage, but the entire network of private charitable institutions that had traditionally filled gaps in Portugal's social services. Government funding cuts had reduced their monthly allowance to less than half of what was needed to maintain basic operations. Utility bills were months overdue. The building needed structural repairs that would cost more than their annual budget. And the staff had been working without pay for 3 months out of love for the children, rather than any realistic hope that their financial situation would improve without external intervention. "We have perhaps 6 weeks before they force us to close," Sister Maria explained, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had fought bureaucratic battles for months, while simultaneously trying to maintain normal routines for children who needed stability more than they needed to understand the adult failures that threatened their security. "The children will be separated, sent to different facilities across the country based on available space rather than their relationships or needs. And everything we have built here, all the family bonds and traditions and sense of belonging, will be destroyed not because we failed the children, but because society has decided that caring for orphan children is not a priority worth funding adequately." That evening, after returning home to his mansion, where every luxury imaginable was taken for granted, Ronaldo found himself unable to concentrate on anything except the faces of 43 children who were about to lose their home and family through no fault of their own. Children whose only crime was needing care in a society that had decided their well-being was less important than budget considerations and political calculations that treated human beings as expendable line items rather than individuals deserving protection and support. The decision he made that night was not impulsive, but had been building throughout the day as he witnessed the gap between what these children needed and what society was willing to provide. And when he called his financial advisor the next morning to discuss quietly purchasing the orphanage building and establishing a trust fund that would ensure its operations in perpetuity, he understood that he was making a commitment that would extend far beyond writing a check. A commitment to becoming a permanent part of 43 children's lives in ways that would require emotional investment and personal involvement rather than just financial support. The legal arrangements took several weeks to complete, during which time Ronaldo visited the orphanage regularly, but asked Sister Maria to keep his involvement confidential until the paperwork was finalized, not because he was ashamed of helping, but because he wanted to ensure that the children's excitement about being saved didn't turn into disappointment if bureaucratic complications prevented the plan from succeeding. And during these visits, he began to understand the individual personalities and dreams of children who had learned to be grateful for small kindnesses while maintaining hope for futures that seemed impossible given their circumstances. The day the orphanage was officially saved was marked not by press conferences or public announcements, but by a quiet celebration in the building's courtyard, where 43 children and their caregivers gathered to hear Sister Maria explain that their home was secure, that they would never be separated, that the Lar dos Anjos would continue operating not just for the current residents, but for future generations of children who needed the safety and love that this place provided. Though she did not initially reveal the identity of their benefactor, except to say that someone who understood the value of family had ensured their family would remain intact. Ronaldo's role as the orphanage's secret guardian became an open secret only gradually, as children began to notice his regular visits, his involvement in their daily activities, his presence at school events and birthday celebrations, and his genuine interest in their individual progress and dreams. But rather than treating him as a celebrity or benefactor, they began to see him as something more complex and meaningful, an adult who had chosen to be part of their extended family, not out of obligation or publicity needs, but out of genuine care for their well-being and future success. The transformation of the orphanage over the following years reflected not just improved financial resources, but the kind of comprehensive support that comes from having someone with influence and connections advocating for the children's needs. The building was renovated to create more private spaces and modern facilities. Educational programs were expanded to include technology training and college preparation. Individual tutoring was provided for children with special needs or academic challenges, and partnerships were established with local businesses and universities to provide internships and scholarship opportunities that would allow the children to pursue their dreams regardless of their economic backgrounds. Anna, the 14-year-old who had taught herself computer programming on an ancient machine, received a full scholarship to study computer science at university and eventually established her own tech company that employed several other orphanage graduates, while Miguel, who had shown Ronaldo the vegetable garden during his first visit, pursued agricultural studies and returned to establish an urban farming program that provided fresh food for the orphanage while teaching younger children about sustainability and self-sufficiency. The ripple effects of Ronaldo's quiet adoption of the orphanage extended far beyond the original 43 children, as the Lar dos Anjos became a model for how private philanthropy could address systemic failures in social services, inspiring other wealthy individuals to adopt similar long-term commitments to institutional change, rather than simply writing occasional checks to feel good about their charitable giving, and demonstrating that sustainable solutions to complex social problems required ongoing investment and personal involvement rather than one-time donations that addressed symptoms without changing underlying structures. Years later, when many of the original children had graduated from university and established successful careers, when the orphanage had become a recognized center of excellence for child care and education, when Ronaldo had quietly adopted the same model at similar institutions in other countries, the true measure of his investment was not the money he had spent, but the lives he had changed, the families he had preserved, the futures he had made possible for children who had started life with nothing but had been given everything they needed to succeed, through the simple recognition that every child deserves a stable home, quality education, and the knowledge that someone believes in their potential regardless of their circumstances. The story of the Lar dos Anjos remained largely private during Ronaldo's playing career, known only to the children, staff, and officials directly involved. But it represented perhaps his most important legacy, proof that true greatness is measured not by trophies or records, but by willingness to use success as a platform for solving problems that society has ignored, for providing hope to people who have been forgotten, and for creating opportunities that allow others to achieve their own versions of success, rather than simply accumulating more recognition and wealth for oneself, demonstrating that the most meaningful victories happen not in stadiums, but in the quiet moments when someone with resources chooses to share them with people who need them most, creating ripple effects that extend across generations and transform communities in ways that outlast any individual achievement or accolade.